Okay, so panel 2, creating an inclusive higher education workforce, will be moderated by Dr. Elka Stevens, who is an associate professor in the Department of Art at Howard University. Dr. Stevens?
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you as we continue in our discussion regarding uncomfortable conversations. I'm pleased to join you as the moderator for our next panel, Creating an Inclusive Higher Education Workforce. Please join me in recognizing and welcoming our two presenters, Dr. Drew Holladay, who is an assistant professor in UMBC's Department of English, and he will be followed by Dr. Horacio Sierra, an associate professor in Belize State's Department of Language, Literature, and Cultural Studies. Each presenter will have 10 minutes, and a brief Q&A will follow. Dr. Holladay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here today, and thank you all, the organizers, for allowing us to be on this panel. I'm going to start sharing a slide set. Give me one moment. All right, is that viewable for everybody? Okay, great. Okay, so my name is Drew Holladay. As Elka said, I'm an assistant professor of English at UMBC, and I'm also going to be joined today by 3 members of the Disability Studies Faculty Working Group, Dr. Sharon Tran, Kate Drabinski, and Stephanie Lazarus. And so we'll be giving very brief presentations to kind of squeeze into 10 minutes and discuss some of the connections between disability studies, disability justice, and racial equity. So to begin, I'm going to summarize real quickly some of the key the core ideas in disability studies as a field, if some of you are not familiar. It grew out of the disability rights movements of the 60s and 70s, and which fought for social inclusion and access for people with disabilities in public life. Probably the most familiar outcome of those movements for us is the Americans with Disabilities Act in the US. Some of the, a few of the concepts that disability studies scholars like to emphasize are, first, recognition of disability as an identity category. So alongside other traditional categories like race, gender, class, sexuality. And also the recognition of invisible disabilities in addition to physical disabilities. And another core move in disability studies is shifting from the medical model to the social model. And that is moving from an individualized conception of impairment to one where the social structures and material structures are disabling for people with different kinds of impairments, and thus the social structures need to be changed. I'm going to pass on to Dr. Sharon Tran.
All right, hi, thank you, Drew. So disability studies has historically seen like a gap in terms of intersections with critical race studies. And now we are seeing more scholars who are trying to really address this gap to develop and enact a mode of color critique, which is a critical methodology that draws primarily from the insights of disability justice activism and women of color feminism. And here methodology is particularly key because these scholars are advocating really a movement away from disability as simply an object of study or an identity, but really thinking about it as an analytic. So one of the core ideas of critical color critique is really conceptualizing disability in terms of precarious populations, which means attending to the ways in which the state itself operates as an apparatus of racialized disablement, whether it's through resource deprivation, compromised public education systems, or police brutality. And finally, critical color critique presses us to imagine what liberation might look like if able-bodiedness is no longer centered. Right, so these scholars call attention to how feminist and ethnic American scholarship has historically envisioned liberation in terms of self-ownership and bodily wholeness. And so what happens if we really shift to really honor disability, vulnerability, and interdependency as a basis for political imagining and coalition building? So before I hand things over to Kate, I just wanted to gesture really quickly towards some of the research that the members of our group have been doing. So slide, Drew. Yeah, and so I just wanted to really spotlight that very first article here, which was co-authored by our colleague Fouad, really because its investigation of special education and access during COVID-19 is particularly timely. So Kate.
Hi, everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can use disability studies as a radical framework to rethink our classrooms. Could I get the next slide, please? Thank you. So I think it's really important to think broadly about accessibility, to bring ideas about equity, racial equity, gender equity, equity around sexuality, and disability all together. So for me, this means thinking about what does it mean to have accessible classrooms? And that might mean, do we have desks that all students can fit in? Do we have multiple ways that we teach in that classroom to meet students where they are? We all know, and our earlier speakers have helped us think historically and broadly, the way that any institutional space can become a site of learning and liberation, but also a site of discipline, punishment, extraction, and violence. And I think that one of the insights I've taken from disability studies is to help me rethink the classroom and my own practices there. And the last sort of point on this slide is that universal design is our horizon. And universal design is about preparing our classrooms and our teaching spaces to meet the needs of all users. I think one thing that when I first started teaching out of graduate school, I designed the classroom for someone like me, who was an A student, who had figured out how to dodge a bunch of difficulties, right? Because otherwise, how would I get through a PhD program? Now I think about meeting a much broader range of needs, and disability studies has really been the way that I've done that. Could I get the next slide, please? All right, so I wanted to share just a few things from students and their requests. I teach a class in disability studies, and we spent a lot of time last semester talking about what an accessible classroom in COVID times would look like, and what would it look like after COVID. And so these are some of the things they told us that I think require us to radically rethink a lot of what we do. First, flexible deadlines. Second, no attendance policy or a flexible attendance policy. And I know that's a hard sell, but I just want to put it on your radar as an idea. I stopped having attendance policies years ago, and it has not actually fundamentally changed my attendance, but it has changed how students experience my classroom space, right? Is it one of discipline, or is it one of openness? Another thing that students have requested are alternative assignments and course materials. And this is also something that challenges us as teachers. We're used to teaching certain kinds of text, but what else could we teach? Podcasts, music videos, magazines, novels, things like that. A lot of you, I'm sure, already do that, but I think it's really important. More than anything, students ask to be believed when they talk about their situations and their disabilities. Oftentimes there's the sense that, oh, students trying to get away with something. And that's actually not what's happening. Every once in a while, someone's trying to get away with something, but I'd rather they get away with it than build a classroom around disciplinary power. Two last things, and then my time is up. Structural change is something I want us all to start thinking about moving forward. Structural changes to financial aid policies that recognize the lived realities of most students who are working full-time, or who are or have care burdens that are really significant. Financial aid requirements hurt everybody, and if we want an equitable space, we need to change those policies. And then finally, students, like all of us, want to be seen as fully human. And now I'm going to kick it to Stephanie.
Often we think of our universities as an institutional matrix, but we are here to transform them. Next slide, please. My role on campus is an ADA coordinator, and what I do is I remind people about our importance the importance of accessibility and ending ableism throughout campus. The ADA has been around for 30 years, and realistically, the quote here is, access is a form of love. Access creates belonging. We cultivate disability inclusive leadership and partnerships to both manage our infrastructure. We work with facilities management, but realistically, it's also about technology, access to technology. Knowledge is power. How much information is, you know, up in the internet or within our technological classroom situations? And we need to include the diversity of students with disabilities. So we want to make sure that we are communicating and actively listening as well. We want to make it easy for people to find their resources, but also being able to connect and say, hey, I'm struggling. That is, for many people, a very awkward conversation. And within the context of this symposium, it's also very often racially loaded. So next slide, please. So when access is not enough, because we live in a very dynamic situation, and I am so fortunate to work with a community of faculty and staff who really get access and want to create a welcoming environment for students of multiple intersectional identities. Sometimes you need to engage with disability services. I always tell people you can call me up and kind of have that training wheel conversation, because they're like, am I supposed to say this or that? And when you engage with disability services, you are actually bringing the world of experience of people who have come before you. We recognize that there is intersectional, racialized experience, particularly within the medical model. Sometimes when it comes into play with matters such as, you know, our poet mentioned consumption, anemia, and lynching, which is a reference to violence and trauma, which go hand in hand with disability. We're here to help. So we look at that, but we also understand that the medical model is pretty much made for middle class or better, or people who have a lifetime experience of disability. We engage with those conversations. We're ready to coach people along, ask questions, and say, and connect them to resources. We also want to create affinity groups and help people find those who can best connect them with their situation and come to resolution. There is huge diversity within disability. We do want people to respect when a student comes up to a faculty member and shares that they are struggling. It may come in the form of, hey, I have this accommodation letter. We don't want them to make presumptions. If they have an accommodation letter, they've already been through the process. We want to make sure our students and our community, when they have an accommodation, when they have gone through the process, that if someone is not grounded in the experience of having that good, connective, supportive conversation, that they reach out to disability services, because we're here to empower change. We also track, during these COVID times especially, trends in disability. And right now, they can inform our practices both for, right now we have more mental health issues. You know, we have an uptick in people who have previously passed, which is sort of a form of ableism, and now really need to have that good conversation. So we just want to remind people that we're here. And we want to see people succeed, both in work and in their academics. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Holladay, as well as members of the UMBC Disability Studies Faculty Working Group. Next, Dr. Sierra.
unmute him.
Thank you so much. Can you see my PowerPoint? Excellent. Okay, I'll go ahead and
thank you.
Get started. Thank you, Dr. Stevens, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for allowing me to be here. Academia has long been ridiculed as an ivory tower filled with aloof professors who pursue niche academic interests while ignoring student needs and the real world. Given recent controversies over higher education's racial biases, we must wonder whether such a critique is attributed to the ivory-skinned complexion of college professors and administrators. While the college student population is rapidly diversifying, faculty ranks lag pathetically behind. Even many impoverished and working class white Americans whose ivory skin grows tanned and callous from works in fields, factories, and fast food restaurants feel disconnected from higher education. The entire country suffers when our institutions of higher learning are unrepresentative of the country's racial, ethnic, and economic diversity. Last year, George Washington University fired a white professor who had been pretending to be an Afro-Latina. Last year, students at Loyola University, Maryland created an Instagram account to share stories about racist encounters on campus. Last year, the Community College of Baltimore County let go of an adjunct professor who posted racist content on his social media. The disconnect continues to grow. As we all know, just this month, 2 Georgetown University law professors were let go when they voiced racially insensitive comments about Black students. You get the point. Even when we move beyond race, we see that students of all racial groups are unable to afford college. While professors, particularly at R1 universities, make 6-figure salaries and teach 1 or 2 courses a semester while they work on their research instead of mentoring students. Classrooms where professors come from backgrounds similar to their students help close achievement gaps and lead to more students seeing their instructors as role models, many studies have shown. What can be done to make this a reality across the nation? Universities need to emphasize teaching, be transparent about their lack of diversity, and recruit, nurture, and retain faculty members from diverse backgrounds, again, racially, ethnically, and economically. Teaching matters. Don't get me wrong. I love attending academic conferences, publishing scholarly journal articles, and doing research in my specialty, in 17th century archives, but I do so after teaching, fulfilling my duties to the greater good by teaching courses on argumentative writing, research methodologies, and literature. Research isn't everything when you're not focusing on students. One area in which I think budget-conscious administrators, higher ed phobic legislators, such as here, we know state funding is being cut all over the country for universities, and pedagogy-oriented professors might be able to agree on is the creation of tenure track lines focused on teaching, where you will get someone who's committed to doing 4-4 or 5-5 teaching and still has the security of tenure. It's mentioned every once in a while, but no one really takes this seriously. And I think everyone benefits if instructors know they will be granted tenure based on their ability to be a dynamic teacher, a thoughtful mentor, and an innovative designer of new courses, especially first-generation college students and those from underrepresented groups who need professors who double as mentors. As it stands, many of us know, professors from underrepresented backgrounds, both racially and economically, are the ones who mentor students with similar backgrounds. And such quote unquote invisible labor is difficult to quantify and leads to such professors being unfairly penalized when they are being reviewed for promotion and tenure. Whether students are Black immigrants from Brazil learning English as their 3rd language, or white 10th generation Americans from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains preparing to be the first in their family to attend college, having professors who focus on teaching and truly understand their students' backgrounds benefit everyone. When students feel comfortable expressing themselves in a classroom led by an inclusive professor, the intellectual conversation fostered by such an environment leads to further student success. And numbers matter. It's not enough for universities to have web pages and centers dedicated to diversity, inclusion, and equity. Administrators are constantly worried about enrollment trends, student credit hours, and endowment sizes. Universities should clearly publish, and more of them are, their enrollment and employment numbers with various demographic data points, including, if possible, again, economic background. Such numbers can serve as a catalyst for taking action on those stated commitments to diversity, inclusion, and equity. For example, the University of Maryland's College Park's numbers are not stellar. While 45% of its undergraduate students come from what they call minority backgrounds, only 24% of its faculty members do. Oddly enough, the data groups all minorities into two large groups, underrepresented and other. Besides the nomenclature being off-putting and contributing to a further sense of being othered without there having more specifics, the categorization fails to differentiate between the unique communities it simply designates as being a minority. And my question also is, what will happen when that 45% crosses the 50% threshold? Will a new minority category be created for non-Hispanic whites? Probably not. The University of Maryland Global Campus's numbers are just as bad. While 47% of its undergrads are quote unquote minorities, only 28% of its faculty members are. For a university without a physical footprint, there are few excuses about being unable to draw a diverse faculty pool, since instructors can arguably live anywhere in the world. Perhaps even worse is one of today's co-hosts, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where 56.9% of its students are minorities, while only 26.8% of its faculty are. Nationally, nearly 20% of college students are Hispanic, more than their 18% share of the US population. And yet, Hispanic faculty members are disproportionately underrepresented at just 5%. The students are there, the brain power is there, the recruitment and hiring is lagging. And I don't just mean at PWIs. HBCUs and ironically enough, HSIs, which are known as Hispanic Serving Institutions, are behind the curve when it comes to these specific numbers. So again, sharing numbers about how many students receive loans and Pell Grants should also be included in this conversation. Such numbers would inform potential students, faculty, and donors about how successful institutions are in creating a campus that reflects America. And finally, actions matter. Strengthening the Ph.D. pipeline is another essential component. If colleges are truly committed to equity, academia needs to nurture these students and provide those who are unable to afford higher education and graduate degrees with financial support, right? Putting our money where our mouth is. Given their lobbying power with state legislatures, flagship campuses, such as the University of Maryland College Park, need to lead the way by creating programs such as Florida's McKnight Doctoral Fellowships, which provides tuition and stipend for Black and Hispanic students pursuing their PhD. The program has awarded more than 1,200 fellowships and increased the number of African Americans and Hispanic PhDs with a retention rate of 88% and a time to degree rate of 5.5 years. Administrators, whom are even less likely to be diverse in students and faculty nationwide, don't have to reinvent the wheel to create equitable systems and solutions. HBCUs have long thrived on finding brilliant Black scholars to teach students. The talent pool is out there. Universities must make a concerted effort to nurture, recruit, and retain a diverse faculty body. For example, training faculty hiring committees how to be truly inclusive is an efficient and effective way to diversify academia. Here's the website that y'all can check out. Every hiring committee should undergo diversity and inclusion training to eliminate explicit and implicit biases. From including the salary range in each job ad to ensuring HR does not accidentally provide information about an applicant's disabilities, there are many logistical mechanisms to consider when creating an inclusive hiring committee. These committees must also advertise the job search through diverse channels, both in traditional print publications and crowdsourced digital platforms. We also need to pitch job searches within our own circles of research interest specific listservs, the graduate schools we attended, HBCUs, HSIs, MSIs, academic job wiki pages, and the people that we know. Deans, chairs, and search committees should be actively recruiting from other universities. Be more like the business world. Be competitive and offer professors from underrepresented backgrounds already on tenured or who are already tenured or on the tenure track a job, or at least let them know about the opportunity to apply for one at your institution. Academia also needs to stop feeling squeamish about money. When I run job searches, I insist on advertising our salary range so that candidates, especially women, are not kept in the dark about their earnings potential, given we know the systemic discrimination against women. Also, a university's non-discrimination policy must be clearly advertised in the job ad. People need to know that you have thought of them and that you are accommodating to those with disabilities. Once an invigorating slate of professors is on board, a university needs to work hard to retain them. A recent study by Harvard found that faculty members perceive their department's commitment to supporting diversity and inclusion differently. 78% of white professors agreed that their department was committed, while only 58% of Black professors did. Considering that it takes about 6 years to earn a doctorate, if you're lucky, in addition to the 4 years for a bachelor's and 2 years for a master's, even the youngest of professors tend to be older than initial hires in other white-collar professions. Social attitudes about diversity and inclusion change slowly. No one likes to feel like the token minority, especially in situations where one person is expected to be a representative of their entire racial or religious group. The more diverse the faculty ranks are, the broader the spectrum can be when having conversations about specific groups and how best to serve them. So to wrap up, at the end of the day, professors exist to serve students' intellectual needs and broaden the world's philosophical, cultural, scientific, and entrepreneurial horizons. Students need to see themselves reflected in the content they study and in the professors who help them grapple with the content. And students are demanding it nationwide, especially in the past few years. Universities need to listen and take action or risk embarrassing themselves with reputation tarnishing headlines and declining enrollment numbers. And I may be preaching to the choir, which begs the bigger question as to why no one from College Park is presenting here today, or why no one from the Board of Regents, as far as I know, is here. And I really applaud the work that this inclusion imperative has done. UMB's center perhaps should take USM to task and create a session for them with everything that all these great scholars are presenting here today and bringing it to them. Because I think, again, amongst ourselves, we're kind of preaching to the choir. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much. Please, everyone, join me again in extending our appreciation to our panelists. Right now, we are running against our time for lunch, so we will not have time for a Q&A session for this particular group, but thank you so very much to everyone. And AP Dark, would you like to give any further instructions before we
Stevens, and thank you
away?
to the thank you to the panelists. Outstanding presentation.